Welcome to the second episode of our Israel-Palestine conflict series. In the previous episode, we discovered the causes and origin of the conflict and onwards developments leading up to the First Lebanon War in 1982. Let us explore more to better understand the conflict and the situation that it is today in. 1987 marked the start of the First Intifada, or uprising. The First Intifada began as Palestinians in the occupied territories revolted against Israeli rule, marking a significant turning point in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Fueled by frustration over years of military occupation, economic hardship, and lack of political rights, Palestinians took to the streets in widespread protests and demonstrations. The images of young Palestinians, often armed only with stones, clashing with heavily armed Israeli soldiers, captured global attention, vividly illustrating the harsh realities of life under occupation. The Intifada reshaped the political landscape, leading to greater recognition of Palestinian rights and aspirations on the world stage. In 1993, Israel and the PLO signed the Oslo Accords, a landmark agreement that recognized the PLO and created the Palestinian Authority to govern parts of the West Bank and Gaza. Many hoped this would be a step toward peace, but unresolved issues like Jerusalem refugees and settlements kept tensions high.
The state of war between Israel and Jordan is over.
The next year, Israel and Jordan signed a peace treaty in 1994, making Jordan the second Arab state to recognize Israel. This agreement brought some stability but didn't advance the core issue of Palestinian statehood. Hopes of peace and resolution did not last long. Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated by a right-wing Jew in 1995. Rabin was a key architect of the Oslo Accords, which aimed to establish a framework for peace between Israelis and Palestinians. His leadership symbolized a commitment to negotiation and reconciliation, making his murder a significant blow to the peace efforts. The subsequent election of Benjamin Netanyahu, who was more skeptical of the peace process, signaled a change in direction. The breakdown of peace talks in the early 2000s led to the eruption of the Second Intifada. This uprising was marked by a wave of suicide bombings carried out by Palestinian militants and retaliatory Israeli military strikes, thereby shattering any remaining hopes for a peaceful resolution. The Second Intifada not only deepened mistrust but also complicated the already fragile peace process, entrenching divisions that persist to this day. In 2005, Israel unilaterally withdrew from Gaza, considering the security, political, and demographic factors. A divided public sentiment in Israel regarding the costs of maintaining a presence in Gaza contributed to the decision for final disengagement. Hamas took control shortly after the withdrawal, which further increased complications in the peace process. In July 2006, following a cross-border raid by Hezbollah that resulted in the deaths of Israeli soldiers and the abduction of 2 others, Israel launched a military offensive known as the Second Lebanon War. The conflict lasted for about a month and was marked by intense fighting, airstrikes, and artillery bombardments. The Second Lebanon War resulted in over 1,000 Lebanese deaths, mostly civilians, and significant infrastructure damage. In Israel, around 160 people were killed, including both military personnel and civilians. The conflict strengthened Hezbollah's influence in Lebanon and heightened regional tensions, further complicating the fragile peace in the area and showcasing the ongoing volatility of the Israeli-Lebanese conflict. The success of Hamas in 2006 elections marked a significant turning point in Palestinian politics, leading to a deep political split with the Fatah, Palestinian political party. This division complicated peace efforts with Israel, as the two factions had differing approaches to negotiations and governance. The rivalry between Hamas and Fatah led to increased tensions, culminating in Hamas taking full control of Gaza in 2007 after a violent clash with Fatah forces. Since then, the Gaza Strip became a hot spot for violence, with frequent clashes between Hamas and Israeli forces. The humanitarian situation in Gaza has deteriorated significantly due to blockades, economic hardships, and repeated conflicts, leading to critical shortages of basic necessities like food, water, and medical supplies. This ongoing crisis has further complicated the prospects for peace, as the political split has hindered unified Palestinian representation in negotiations with Israel and exacerbated regional instability. In late 2008, Israel launched Operation Cast Lead in response to a surge in rocket attacks from Gaza, primarily by Hamas. The offensive began on December 27th and lasted for 3 weeks, resulting in approximately 1,400 Palestinian deaths, many of whom were civilians, alongside 13 Israeli fatalities. The conflict escalated tensions between Israel and Palestinian factions, complicating future peace efforts and intensifying international scrutiny of the situation. In July 2014, tensions between Israel and Hamas escalated dramatically, leading to a conflict known as the Gaza War 2014, or Operation Protective Edge. The conflict erupted after the kidnapping and murder of 3 Israeli teenagers and series of rocket fires by Hamas and associated militias. In response, Israel launched airstrikes targeting Hamas infrastructure. The war lasted for 50 days, resulting in over 2,200 Palestinian deaths, the majority being civilians, and 73 Israelis, including 67 soldiers. The conflict exacerbated the enduring volatility of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The Abraham Accords, signed in 2020, marked a significant turning point in Middle Eastern diplomacy, normalizing relations between Israel and several Arab states, including the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain. Critics argued that the accords effectively sidelined the Palestinian issue, leaving their struggle for statehood and rights unresolved. Many Palestinians viewed the agreements as a betrayal. The lack of progress on key issues such as the status of Jerusalem and the right of return for refugees intensified Palestinian frustrations and squashed hopes of self-determination. On October 7, 2023, Hamas launched an unprecedented multi-pronged attack on Israel, involving thousands of rockets and ground incursions, resulting in significant casualties among civilians and soldiers, and marking one of the deadliest days in Israel's history. In swift retaliation, Israel initiated extensive military operations against Hamas targets in Gaza, raising fears of a prolonged cycle of violence. The rapid escalation prompted international actors to call for immediate restraint from both sides to prevent further loss of life and humanitarian suffering. Less than a year later, IDF launched an invasion in Lebanon, thereby expanding the conflict to a third nation. Today, the Israel Defense Forces are deeply engaged in operations in both Gaza and Lebanon, where the devastating toll of war continues to mount. In Gaza, the ongoing conflict has resulted in the tragic deaths of over 52,000 people, an enormous figure that includes both Palestinians and Israelis. On the other side, the conflict in Lebanon has claimed the lives of around 2,000 people, further intensifying the cycle of violence and suffering that seems unending. Each life lost represents a story cut short, dreams extinguished, and families torn apart by an unrelenting cycle of hatred and retaliation. As we witness the unfolding tragedy, we are reminded of the fragility of peace and the deep wounds that war inflicts, leaving behind a haunting legacy that will resonate for generations. In the midst of this turmoil, the cries for peace and healing grow ever louder, drowned out by the thunder of conflict and the heartbreaking toll of human loss. The United Nations has been actively involved in addressing the Israel-Palestine conflict through a series of significant resolutions and recommendations. In 1947, UN General Assembly Resolution 181 proposed the partition of Palestine into Jewish and Arab states, a plan accepted by Jewish leaders but rejected by Arab leaders. Following the 1967 Six-Day War, Security Council Resolution 242 called for Israel's withdrawal from occupied territories and emphasized the need for a just settlement for refugees. Subsequent resolutions like 465 and 2334 condemned Israeli settlement activities and reaffirmed their illegality under international law. The UN consistently advocates for a two-state solution, envisioning an independent state of Palestine alongside Israel, and calls for renewed negotiations to address core issues like borders and the status of Jerusalem. Humanitarian assistance remains a critical focus, particularly for Palestinians in Gaza, as living conditions worsen due to ongoing conflict. Despite numerous resolutions and recommendations, achieving lasting peace requires commitment from all parties and the international community. The UN continues to emphasize the importance of dialogue, adherence to international law, and a comprehensive approach to resolving this enduring conflict. It is essential to reflect on the complex history and human suffering that has shaped this enduring struggle. Both sides have endured profound losses and have experienced moments of pain, resilience, and hope. The stories on both sides are filled with deeply rooted grievances and aspirations, each reflecting a unique perspective on the quest for security, identity, and justice. While the violence has left scars that may never fully heal, the quest for peace remains a shared desire among many. In a world seeking understanding and resolution, it is crucial to recognize the aggressor and tyrant for future generations to know. Here, we leave it up to our viewers to decide.